Good afternoon. Hopefully you are doing well, enjoying yourself here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation 14th Annual Policy Orientation. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I'm an economist here at the Foundation in the Center for Fiscal Policy, working on a lot of taxes and budgets, things of that nature, along with the director of the Center for Fiscal Policy, Talmadge Heflin, the Honorable Talmadge Heflin. I'm sure you all know him. So thank you all for joining us here in this panel. We've got a great group with us today that will be able to discuss what exactly is the best model for Texas moving forward when we look at the tax system. How can we simplify the tax code, and how has it worked in the past? And when you look at the Texas model here at the Foundation, we look at it as being a model of low taxes, limited government spending, less regulation, no personal income tax, and a good lawsuit climate that's tend to lead to more economic prosperity and more opportunity to prosper. When you look at from December 2007 to November of 2015, the latest data available, Texas has created 48% of all civilian jobs across the U.S., 48%. When we also have more income, Texas overall increase in real average pay, so when you look at inflation-adjusted income, has increased 67% faster than average pay across the U.S. When you compare us with other states like California, poverty here, the poverty level, when you look at adjusted for cost of living, and you also adjust it for government benefits, the supplemental poverty index, Texas ranks about the middle of the pack, California ranks last. When you look at a lot of these different factors, economic freedom, Texas ranks third. We've actually fallen to third this past year when you look at economic freedom of North America from first the previous year. But when you look at California, they rank second to last. So there's a lot of things that are going right in Texas, but how can we improve it? How are we going to move Texas to the next level? There are some things when you look at other measures out there that show that, you know what, Texas isn't the best. We have some room for improvement. We have Scott Drenkard here from the Tax Foundation that they put out a report, the State Business Tax Climate Index, that ranks all the states based on their tax climate, business tax climate, and we rank 10th. I don't know about you, but in Texas, we like to be number one in things. And so we have some room to improve, and he'll discuss some of the issues there with the State Business Tax Climate Index. And a lot of you know a lot of that has to do with the business franchise tax, also known as the margin tax. Another area that we tend to have a high burden in Texas is property taxes, right? Property taxes ranks the 14th most burdensome property tax system in the nation. So we've got some areas that I think we need to improve. You know, taxes aren't necessarily a form of trying to necessarily redistribute wealth. It's a way in order to fund the essential government services that are needed. And how can you do that in the most efficient way possible with creating the least distortions throughout the economy? And I think we have a great group here today that can discuss some of these things. I mean, they took great strides this past session. There was a 25% cut in the margin tax rates for a value of $2.6 billion. There was an increase in the homestead exemption for property taxes on school districts, for school districts, of $10,000 for a value of $1.2 billion. And there were other taxes and fees that were eliminated for about $200 million for historic tax relief of a total of $4 billion this past session. I mean, that's quite remarkable when you think about it. And they still were able to fund essential government services. We may have some disagreements if it was fully funded amongst some here, and hopefully we can discuss some of those today. But overall, what is going to make a simple tax system in Texas? What's going to move us forward into the future that builds on what we've already been able to do? And I think that's essential for everything else that we look at here in the state of Texas, whether it's funding education, whether it's funding transportation. I mean, you name it, we've got to be able to fund it somehow, and let's do it in the least distortionary, least costly way. So I'll end my remarks there because I really want to get to our panelists. They have plenty of time here today. Our first panelist, Scott Drenkard from the Tax Foundation. He is the Director of State Projects there. In 2013, he co-authored books on North Carolina tax policy and Nebraska tax policy, which laid the groundwork for fundamental tax reform in each state. He's also highlighted, the Center for State Tax Policy were highlighted in State Tax Notes, most influential in state tax policy in 2011, 12, and 13, probably 14, 15. It just keeps going on, Scott.
He did get it this year.
You did get it this year, too. Okay, all right, good. Prior to joining the Tax Foundation, he was selected as a Charles Koch Summer Fellow by the Institute for Humane Studies, served as Ronald Reagan Fellow in the Goldwater Institute's Center for Economic Prosperity, and he holds a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Washington and a master's in economics at George Mason University. Please help me to introduce or bring up to the panel here today Scott Drenkard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vance, and thank you to all the staff for TPPF that's here. This is a really, truly an excellent event. It's great to watch how this has grown, even just since last year. And you guys aren't even doing a legislative session this year, so the attendance is awesome, and the programming has been really, really great. Thank you again. I want to do two quick things, and then I'll turn things over to my co-panelists here. The first thing I want to do, given that the Tax Foundation is an organization that does state work, but from a national perspective, I want to give the lay of the land for Texas's tax competitiveness nationally. And then the second thing I want to do is point to one policy, and you can probably guess what it is based on the name of my slideshow, point to one policy item that I think does Texas the most disservice, and talk about why. Before we jump into that, I'm going to tell you a little bit briefly about the Tax Foundation and what we do for some of you that might not be as familiar with us, and then we'll get to that. So the Tax Foundation, we're an independent, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works on tax policy issues, and we've been doing this. We've been doing this for quite a long time. Since 1937, we've worked on tax issues. I guess I got to change this slide now that it's the new year. It's 79 issues, so we're coming up on that 80th anniversary. And we have a wide variety of items that we work on. We do research each year. Vance mentioned our State Business Tax Climate Index, which is an anticipated item that comes out each year. We've done that for now 12 years. We also publish data every year that's sometimes hard to find among the sort of annals of government databases. This is a screenshot of our Facts and Figures publication that we've published since 1941, which is a pocket-shaped guide to everything related to state tax policy and rankings and rates and all sorts of measures of tax policy that are helpful for reference. We also do analysis every single day, new analysis. I was actually just working on a blog today that I'm going to put up later on today. We usually have about 3 or 4 new blogs that come out each day. We get a couple million viewers to our blog each year, a total of like 7 or 8 million website viewers each year. I encourage you to sign up for updates on our tax policy blog. And then we've got a team that does federal work. Right now we're helping the presidential candidates score their tax plans, and in some cases giving some advice and guidance on how they might want to change their tax plans to make them more pro-growth, more simple, more neutral. We, of course, also work on state issues. This is a book we did on North Carolina. And then we do some local issues, too. This is a chart book that we did on San Diego. So what this slide is supposed to convince you is that the Tax Foundation has a resource for all of your tax needs. If you ever have a question on tax policy at the state, federal, local level, we've probably done some research on it, and I encourage you to either pick up the phone and give me a call or just navigate to our website where you can find a ton of great stuff. Our flagship study is the State Business Tax Climate Index, which helps us to quantify the quality, not the quantity, but the quality of state tax structures. So we're not asking the very basic question of how much is raised by taxes in your state. There's lots of other measures for that. This report helps us focus on how taxes are raised. What is the structure of taxes in your state? And the reason we do this is because we all know that there is several ways to raise a dollar in revenue, but that they are not equal in terms of the economic damage that they can do. There are some taxes that are much more damaging to economic growth than other taxes, and this is our attempt to score states on that. This map is a little bit hard to see just because of how it's rendering here, but you do get a pretty good idea of the top 10 and bottom 10 states in the index. And look at Texas. Texas is in the top 10. It ranks 10th overall, and that score is the scores in each of the 50 states on this is one thing that reporters love because it gives them a one-line explanation of how good or how bad their tax system is. A lot of the bottom 10 states you can see are clustered in the Northeast, or in Washington, D.C., where I live and have to deal with that tax code, or in Maryland, where some of my friends live, and I'm trying to convince them to either move to Virginia or even D.C., where the taxes are better. And then you got California out there, but then a lot of western states with pretty good top 10 tax structures. We can even go much further than this and break up the tax structure in Texas past that 10th overall ranking. We look at 5 subcomponent rankings there that include corporate taxes, individual taxes, sales taxes, unemployment insurance taxes, and property taxes. Some of my other panelists are going to be talking about, my co-panelists here are going to be talking about property taxes later on. The 2 that I want to focus on today are the corporate income tax and the individual income tax. And you all might be saying to me, Scott, Texas doesn't have an individual income tax. Why do we rank 6th? We should be ranking 1st. That's a pretty good question. The reason the state ranks 6th on individual income taxes is because the margin tax, which also gives the state 41st in corporate taxes, the margin tax grabs into income that's traditionally taxed in other states by the individual income tax and taxes that through the corporate code as well. So we have to account for that. So LLCs, S corporations that pay the margin tax here in Texas, we account for that on the index, and this state doesn't. One way to think about it is that the state is not fully exempting individual income the way that other states do, and so that's how we score it in our state business tax climate index. So I've kind of honed in. The margin tax is it. The margin tax for me is the item that Texas is least competitive on. Texas often gets brought up in conversations in other states about where states want to go. Sometimes people don't have an idea of what they want to do with tax reform, but they would say to me, we want to do whatever it is that Texas is doing because it appears to be working out pretty well. And I say, okay, well, I can give you a lot of things that you'd like to copy, but maybe don't copy, well, no, definitely don't copy the margin tax. The first problem with the margin tax is that it's complicated. Here's a chart that we put up that we created last year in a paper that we did on the Texas margin tax that shows how your calculation works on a margin tax form. You can see that the first item there is that you have to determine one of 4 tax bases. You either get to take 70% of total revenue, you get to take total revenue minus $1 million exemption, you get to take total revenue minus employee compensation, or total revenue minus cost of goods sold. So 4 tax bases, which I only know of one other state that has a corporate type tax with 4 tax bases, and it's New York State. So not on a good list at that point. Then you have to go down and do apportionment, which a lot of other states require you to do on corporate income taxes. But then you apply tax rates, and then there's 2 different tax rates that you have to apply depending on what type of business you are. Are you a wholesaler or are you a retailer? Are you something else? Believe me, there's a lot of litigation about what classification that you fall under, because depending on which business type you have, your rate could be half of other business tax types. So that adds to complexity. Then there's a ton of credits here, which we have there listed on the bottom. Finally, you arrive at your final tax liability, and if it's under a certain amount, well, then you can just throw your whole form out because you just did all this work for nothing. So there's a lot of complications in calculating the Texas margin tax, so much so that accounting firms, when this thing was put in place, and started charging businesses double what they used to under the old franchise tax calculation, and a lot of businesses were upset. The other problem that you have with the Texas margin tax is that it has a couple of the bases are based on gross receipts. And gross receipts taxes have fallen out of style in the last 200 to 300 years. So gross receipts taxes, the reason that they've fallen out of style is because they cause what's called tax pyramiding. On the top chart here, I've got an example of a glass of milk and how it gets created. You've got a cow, there's a carton, there's a distributor with a milkman, I guess a milk truck that then goes to a grocer and then gets sold to a consumer. That's what I'm showing there. And with each new production, you've got, with each new sort of intermediate step, you've got an additional value that's added to the product. That's the blue bars. That's value growing as the product comes closer to milk in my hand that I can drink. And in a retail sales tax on the top, the tax is only applied once at final sale. In a gross receipts tax on the bottom, the tax is applied at each individual transaction level. Each time a gross receipt is generated, you have the tax, of course, being layered on top of itself, because then you have taxes stacking on top of taxes. It's called tax pyramiding because it looks like a lot like a pyramid. Texas is one of just a few states to do this. There are many states that have repealed them. The purple states that have repealed gross receipts taxes are there in the last 15 years. They've repealed them. You've got Indiana, Kentucky that only had theirs for like 4 years. New Jersey, my favorite one, where they instituted it and then repealed it a year after because of outcry. Michigan, which got rid of their Michigan business tax in 2011. And then just a couple of other states there. One of just 5 states that has gross receipt style taxes, with the other ones being Washington, Ohio, Virginia, Delaware. And then Nevada just implemented one last year, which was a very, very sad story. So 6 states total. And I mentioned already that, yes?
They rejected it 2 sessions ago.
Sure.
And then they accepted it this session.
Yes.
But I went out there and tried to help them. What happened?
So,
Do you mind me asking?
yeah, so I can give, you want the 30-second story?
Well, real short.
Governor Brian Sandoval ran in part on opposition to a tax that was just like the Texas margin tax, except double in size. So 2% instead of the 1% rate that's levied here on the Texas margin tax. And there was an initiative that didn't even have support from the local teachers union. I mean, so many people were against it. Voters didn't even know what it was, but knew that they were against it. And the ballot measure failed 70% to 30%. That's like one of the most favorable. I think it might have even been more than that. It could have been 75 or like even closer to 80. And Governor Brian Sandoval, or when he was running for a governor, was strongly opposed to this. Then when sort of the legislative session came around, they had decided that they really wanted to increase revenue for education, and actually business groups were on the side of thinking about new revenue for education expenditures. And what they ended up settling on after a variety of permutations was something that looked frustratingly like the Texas margin tax, even though that was something that the governor had campaigned against when he was running for office. That's what they ended up with. Now, we fought that pretty hard, and they ended up exempting a lot of businesses. They have a pretty strong, very high de minimis exemption, so most small businesses won't file this tax. But that was a hard pill to swallow to see that one get enacted. However, the overall trend for the last, again, 300 years, and here's a quote that I have from a Spanish statesman and Enlightenment thinker talking about the Alcavala tax, which has been gone since 18 such and such. The trend has been away from turnover taxes, from gross receipts taxes, from taxes like the Texas margin tax that start with what you sold as opposed to your profit. It looks like I've got another quote here just to further hammer home my point that nobody likes these things. This is a public finance expert, John Dew, who wrote the book on sales taxes. The book is actually called Sales Taxation. He also wrote a book on government finance that was a very formidable government finance textbook. It was called Government Finance. And this is kind of the guy I go to when I want to get what the mainstream public finance approach is to a particular type of tax. And you see here, he just dismisses turnover taxes out of hand. He says, the defects of the turnover tax have been made extremely clear. Academics never talk like that. Extremely clear by long experience, and of course, academics never say that either, and of course have been responsible for the abandonment of the tax by most countries. Here's another explanation of the Texas margin tax by another formidable tax expert, John Mikesell at Indiana University, where he says the Texas margin tax is, quote, a badly designed business profits tax like those that emerged in the newly independent states of the former Soviet Union. It combines all the problems of minimum income taxation in general, excess compliance and administrative costs, penalization of unsuccessful businesses, undesirable incentive impacts, doubtful equity basis, with those of taxation according to gross receipts. So you kind of get the worst of both worlds with the Texas margin tax. Yeah. Other than that, how does the tax work? So this is my favorite explanation of how the tax is structured here. So just to kind of close, I think my time is up now. I'll give sort of my prognostication here about what maybe the state should do in terms of looking at the Texas margin tax. Well, I really think the state should repeal the Texas margin tax. I don't think it's good, especially from a national perspective, when so many states are looking to Texas to be the model, to have such a poorly structured business tax, one that other states sometimes try to problematically emulate. And here I've got the projections of what would happen if the state were to eliminate the margin tax. It would move the overall score in our index from 10th to 3rd, so a little bit closer to first place for you, Vance. But you would get the corporate component and the individual component to first place in both of those instances, so a couple ones. Senator.
We always want to be number one in Texas, but the two, if we were to do this, and we're going to, trust me, I'm giving him some of my time. Okay. The two that are number one and number two, it's like Wyoming.
Yeah, it's Wyoming and South Dakota.
It's not worth trying to be number one in this particular ranking. 3's plenty good. Am I wrong about
Oh,
that?
I like number 3. That's pretty good.
Okay. And for various reasons, it'd be almost impossible to edge out Wyoming.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So, yeah,
We
3,
had this
if the
discussion
question
before.
is 3 pretty damn good, 3's pretty damn good.
Okay.
Thank you. You ready? Yeah. All right. All right, thank you. Thank you, Scott. All right, thank you. So we got some things to look forward to then. Our next speaker today is Senator Craig Estes. He represents the 30th Senatorial District located in North Texas and was the first elected to the Texas Senate in 2001 special election. Texas Senate elected him President Pro Tem during the 83rd interim. He's a strong advocate of private property rights and the only member of the Texas legislature to have received the Texas State Rifle Association's highest award following the last 2 legislative sessions. And he's also the chair of the interim committee on natural resources. Is that right? So a lot of good things going on. So Senator Craig Estes.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, Scott, if you can't set something up like that, if you can't hit it out of the ballpark after he sets it up like that, I need to quit. Let me just say, first of all, to the Public Policy Foundation folks, I've been doing this for 14 years now. I don't know how we could function without this group giving us research and good information. They are superlative in what they do, and each and every one of you deserves a lot of accolades and kudos, whatever. Let's give it to them, please. I'm going to be so short it's going to make you think I'm not a senator.
I'm timing you.
Let me just say this. Most all of us drank the Kool-Aid in 2006 when we replaced a tax that was pretty much a volunteer tax, a business tax. It was a volunteer tax. And, you know, I'm not going to blow smoke here. I voted for it. But I did, Mr. Morrissey, have an epiphany when I talked to some of you guys, you gurus. There's a lot of experience in this room. And I said, I had an epiphany. I really did. And we can do without this onerous, complex tax. It's been so carefully laid out. I don't need to go over my notes. Scott did it for me. So the last 2 sessions, I've filed a bill to completely abolish this tax. I have not been successful as yet, but let me make this promise public. God willing and voters willing, before I leave public office, we will abolish this onerous tax. Now, having said that, we cut it by 25% last session. That's good. But at the end of the day, we don't really need it. The sad fact of the matter is, in my humble opinion, we could have completely abolished it last session and had enough money. We had plenty of money. I don't know what this next session's going to hold, But we're going to keep hammering on this. We're not going to say no. We're not going to take no for an answer. I thank my friend Talmadge Heflin. He cleared it up for me. What are we going to replace this with, Talmadge? Talmadge, is he listening? Are you asleep back there, Talmadge? Nothing. Yeah, economic growth. And let me just say, my colleague, Senator Bettencourt, is truly an expert on property taxes. I never met a tax cut I didn't like, but I was a part, there again, of that biggest property tax cut in history, and it didn't work. So we're going to talk about how that works, how we can make that work. The folks, we can do without this, and it's not about industry, Deb. It's not about big business. It's not about capitalism. It's about jobs for everyday Texans. And it's going to happen. I give you my word. It's what I will work for. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, Senator Estes. Quick to the point. I like it. All right. Our next panelist is Representative Chris Turner. State Representative Chris Turner serves the people of House District 101, Tarrant County, which includes major portions of Arlington and Grand Prairie. During the 84th legislative session, Representative Turner was appointed to serve on the House Ways and Means Committee, charged with addressing our state's tax policy. In his 3 terms in the legislature, Representative Turner has authored several tax-related measures, including the constitutional amendment passed by Texas voters in 2013 to allow spouses of military killed in action to be exempt from ad valorem taxes. Representative Turner also serves in the House committees on higher education and general investigating and ethics. Representative Turner, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for that very kind introduction. And I want to thank the TPPF for inviting me here today and for putting on this conference. This is an impressive operation, and I sincerely appreciate the fact that at a conference like this, you're looking to bring a diversity of opinions and I guess that's why I'm here today, is to provide some of that diversity of opinion on some of these issues. So I'm very happy to be here and very honored to be with my colleagues in the legislature, Senators Estes and Bettencourt. And Scott, I thank you for your presentation. I learned a lot listening to that. And I was particularly struck that map you put up to show the 10 best and the 10 worst states in the country for business tax policy. Now, I wasn't surprised to see Texas in the top 10. I think that's, I think we all expect we'd be towards the top, but I was just shocked to see Ohio and New Jersey and Wisconsin in the 10 worst. And what are Governors Christie and Kasich and Walker, what are they doing? I couldn't. Because every time I hear them talk, I hear about how the business climate is so great in their states. So, sorry, I couldn't pass that up. So, obviously, you might have a little bit different perspective on some of these issues than some of my fellow panelists. But let me just say from the onset that I agree with the premise of a lot of what has been said here today, that there are a lot of problems with our franchise tax, margins tax in Texas, and with the property tax system. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and I think we can all agree on that. First, I want to talk about the franchise tax. And I think it's important when we talk about the franchise tax, we talk a little bit about how we got to where we are today. Now, we all know that the franchise tax was, in its current form, was expanded as a result of the 2006 Supreme Court ordered school finance reform. And since its implementation, in fiscal year 2008, the first full year was in effect, the franchise tax has not delivered what was promised when the legislature passed it in 2006. Of course, when it was proposed, there was a fair share of skepticism about how it would actually perform. Our former comptroller at the time, Carol Keaton-Strayhorn, said it wouldn't work, and she said it wouldn't generate the, at that time, $6 billion a year that had been projected. And it turns out she was exactly right. In fiscal year 2008, it was $1.4 billion under projection. Fiscal year 09, $1.8 billion under. And in fiscal year 10, $2.5 billion under. And so ultimately, as Comptroller Strayhorn predicted, the franchise tax failed to adequately fund the property tax relief fund, which combined with the one-third property tax rate reduction, roughly one-third rate reduction that the legislature passed in 06, and the need to hold school districts harmless in the school finance legislation, that created a recurring structural deficit. Of course, most of our school districts would question if they were actually held harmless in reality, given that since 2006 passage of that law, we've seen funding further reduced, and most notably in 2011 by $5.4 billion. And although some of that funding has gradually been restored since, we're still not at pre-2011 levels in 1/4 of the school districts in this state. And of course, as we all know, the school finance system is back before the Supreme Court, and so maybe we in the legislature will have another opportunity to look at this in the next year or two. Now, not only did our expanded franchise tax fail to meet its original revenue projections from the beginning, the legislature since then has systematically further reduced the revenue derived from the franchise tax by carving out exemptions and reducing rates. And admittedly, I have voted for some of those exemptions and some of those rate reductions, while I have voted against others. In fiscal year 2015, franchise tax exemptions and deductions total $1.88 billion. And so the more cuts that we approve in the legislature, the more exemptions we put into law, and the more we limit who pays, the more unstable and the more complicated this system becomes. And that's the other big problem with the franchise tax, in my view. It is unduly complicated. When CPAs tell me that it is easier to prepare a company's federal income tax return than it is to calculate the Texas franchise tax, we've got a problem. And I hope we would all agree that this system needs to be simplified dramatically. And in my view, right now, without an alternative on the table, simplification cannot mean abolishment. I understand and appreciate that it's important that Texas continue to have a competitive business environment. I think we all want that. But I fear what has happened in Texas is that we've made it more competitive. We've made it competitive for some, more competitive for some through carve-outs, exemptions, and special accounting methods, and less competitive for others. And we shouldn't use the franchise tax through exemptions and carve-outs to pick winners and losers. Now, I also believe that a competitive business environment consists of more than just tax policy. It also includes infrastructure and physical resources such as transportation, water, and energy, and it especially includes human infrastructure, a highly skilled, well-educated workforce, and a healthy workforce. The more we shortchange public education and ignore a mounting healthcare crisis, the more we make our business climate in the long term less desirable. The current franchise tax system is far from ideal, but we just can't continue to chip away or consider abolishment without having a sound alternative to consider. Reducing the taxpayer base or raising the threshold on what is taxable further limits the pool of who pays and ultimately reduces revenue to the state. It also places a greater burden on larger companies and those that don't qualify for exemptions. Now, as the Senator discussed last session, the legislature passed House Bill 32, which reduced the franchise tax rate by 25% and results in and further exempted smaller businesses, and that results in a $2.5 billion tax cut, or $2.5 billion in lost revenue for this biennium. Now, based on what I've said so far, it probably won't surprise any of you that I voted against this bill. But as a result of HB 32, we're going to have to, we will reduce the revenue that's going into the Property Tax Relief Fund, remember that from 2006, from about $9 billion to about $6.5 billion for the biennium. And that's money we're going to have to find somewhere else. Now, in the past, we've made up for it in general revenue. But guess what? That's going down too right now. For the last 6 months of 2015, in 5 of those 6 months, the sales tax revenue was down from the same month in 2014. And I don't have to tell any of you that our oil and gas severance tax revenue is taking a big hit right now as well. When times are good, it's become the legislature's policy or habit to reflexively cut taxes. But what about when the budget picture is not as rosy as it was last year? During the debate on HB 32 on the House floor, I offered an amendment to make this cut temporary, to sunset it, if you will, for after 2 years, so that future legislatures wouldn't have their hands tied. If it was prudent to renew the tax cut and extend another 2 years, they could. But if the revenue was needed, they could consider that as well. But unfortunately, that amendment did not pass. Now, shifting gears for a second to property taxes. As a member of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, I was proud to support and co-sponsor Senate Bill 1, which both of my fellow panelists joint authored, I know, in the Senate, and that increased the homestead exemption by $10,000. And this was important for Texas homeowners, as it will have a direct, albeit small, impact on people's property tax bills. And I'm glad it passed in November with nearly 80% of the vote, over 80% of the vote. And I think we can all agree that property taxes are high in Texas compared to most other states. In fact, I was surprised to learn that we're 14. I thought we would have been even worse than that. But of course, we know that a lot of those other states that have better property tax situations also have a state income tax, which we do not have. Now, with the discussion of property taxes, I often hear a lot of talk about the way to deal with high property taxes is to implement appraisal caps. And this is an important issue, and one that I've discussed at length with county, city, and school officials in my community, local leaders. And I found that it doesn't matter if they're Republicans or Democrats or conservatives or liberals, they're virtually unanimous in their opposition to messing with the appraisal caps. And if we're to seriously consider reducing the appraisal cap below the current 10% as a solution to reducing property taxes, we also got to look at the consequences. The bottom line is this: if we lower appraisal caps, we reduce the ability of local governments to adequately address the needs of their communities, including police and fire protection, transportation, infrastructure, water, and countless other local services that most of us would take for granted in our day-to-day lives. Our local schools, which rely heavily on property taxes, would also be put in a very difficult position. Already, many school districts must rely on alternative funding and debt to pay for needed projects. By adopting an across-the-board appraisal cap impacting the entire state, the legislature would be tying the hands of local communities who would then be forced to cut services or find funding elsewhere. Now, I hear a lot of talk in this town about the power of the free market, but in the next breath, sometimes I'll hear the same folks advocate that we need to have state government come in and put a limit on how much you can value property. And if we do that, we'd essentially be passing a property value control law, in my opinion. And I don't think that's very in line with free market principles. And most importantly, though, an appraisal cap will hurt the very people we're ostensibly trying to help. By reducing the 10% appraisal cap, say, to 5%, we would place a greater burden on middle-class homeowners who currently see a lower increase in appraisal value than those in higher valued homes in more affluent communities, not to mention commercial real estate interests. So to compensate for lost revenue from high-end properties, the difference will be made up on the backs of middle-income homeowners through higher rates or new fees, or both. Yes, property taxes are high because the tax system we have forced our local governments and school districts to rely on it. And yes, property values have risen, which has driven up property tax bills. And I see that in my community in North Texas where the economy is booming. And that's a blessing. And one of the downsides of it is higher values mean higher property tax bills. But if we want to take action on the high cost of home ownership, which I agree is an issue because we rank, I think, 41st in the nation in terms of home ownership, we could look at a lot of other areas as well. For instance, homeowners insurance rates. I don't know about y'all, but my homeowners insurance rates have gone up on average 20% each of the last 3 years. And it's simply not sustainable for a lot of people. And here's the most important thing to remember when it comes to property taxes. More than half of your total property tax bill of anyone in Texas is local school district property taxes. So if we want to impact property taxes, we have to look at that side of the equation. And it simply means more state revenue, not less, unless we want to further reduce school funding. And that's essentially the choice and the dilemma that we have. So I think that as we look at these issues, we have to consider the franchise tax and the property tax and the revenues that they bring in are very interrelated, and we have a minimum number and level of services that our constituents expect us to provide or see that are provided for our schools and for other needs in our state, and we've got to figure out a way to make it all work. Can we make it more fair? Yes, I think we can. Can we simplify it? I certainly hope we can. And so I look forward to working with you and my colleagues in the legislature on these issues as we go into the next session. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Representative Turner. And last but certainly not least, we have Senator Paul Bettencourt, as the Chief Executive Officer of Bettencourt Tax Advisors, LLC, a radio and TV personality, former Harris County Tax Assessor Collector from 1998 to 2008, and the current Texas Senator from District 7. At the tax office, he introduced smart government and developed a customer service-driven organization. His leadership in office and the community earned Senator Bettencourt the Taxpayer Advocate of the Year Award from Americans for Prosperity, the Hero of Faith Award from the Houston Area Pastors Council, and the Pioneer Award from the Harris County Republican Party. Appointed to the Senate Finance Committee by Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and recently he's on the Senate. He's the chair of the Senate Committee for Property Tax Relief and Reform. So please help me welcome Senator Bettencourt.
Well, I'm the caboose on the train for the day, and it's really interesting to be on a panel. Scott, first off, if you're scoring presidential candidates, how do you have time to visit us on their tax plans? Come on. Different team. Okay, right. So you're not doing double duty then. I was kind of fascinated by that, how you could be in two places at one time. I also want to say something about Chairman Estes. When I had a chance to get into the Senate, we had a chance to visit. And one of the things he did was he had already filed a bill to eliminate the franchise tax. And it takes a really good statesman to stand up and say, hey, I made a mistake on a vote. Okay? We don't like doing that. Okay? But he did. And not only did he do it, immediately I had Senator Taylor file another bill to eliminate it. And by the time I could get elected, there was like 6 bills that were filed to eliminate it. So I told him I would all co-sponsor their stuff. Because the point here is that the margins tax really is a margins tax. It's a very cumbersome, poor, and in my opinion, poor way to do revenue collection as a tax collector, because it's not certain. Every business out here cannot tell me right now what my liability is going to be. Mike, you can't tell me what your liability is, okay? And because there are so many different methods. And the fact that Nevada and others could repeal it so quickly tells you that a margins tax is bad public policy. Now, in 2006, I actually called my state reps on the floor and flipped votes against it, okay? Because I knew we'd end up with this problem that we're in now. Because part of the problem of the margins tax is that the money is buying down your tax rates on your school side of your taxes. Now, to Representative Turner, who made a good case, and by the way, he does show up, you know, so between Craig and I, he has to kind of hold us apart there, because we're going to try to get this done before Craig retires, right? We're going to get rid of this tax. Because what the real problem is that for property taxes, the state benefits by you paying more. You all know it's Robin Hood. You hear that. I call it Robin the Hood. Because if the state pays more on school taxes, when you pay more locally on your school taxes, the state pays less. So when you hear that, yes, we have a bunch of exemptions that we're paying for right now in the state budget, understand in just 1 year, 2 year biennium cycle, the state benefited by $4.5 billion by the fact that you paid more locally into the state coffers, and we paid less to school districts. Because property taxes are going through the roof. They're going through your roof at home, and they're going through your roof at your business. And to talk about this, we're going to go through some slides real fast, because also Senator Estes talked about the buy down of tax rates. You'll see that. This is it's an 11-year running tally of the total amount of increases on special district property taxes. And you could start with a $28 billion levy. It's up to $49 billion and change. That's a 106% increase in 11 years. Next slide. Oops, no, go the other way. Okay. I think we've got 2 other slides, don't we, David? Okay, yeah, go back up if you can. There should be one on counties, one on cities. There we go. All right, there we go. All right. Now,
The city one?
yeah, let's do the city one first. The cities are less reliant on taxes because on property taxes because they have a sales tax. But even with that less reliance, their increase over 11 years is 76%. When you see, you've got some years as much as high as 10%. There's no, and also what happened in 2007 is some of the taxing jurisdictions took advantage of the fact that there was a rate buy down, okay? And jacked their rates up in that year because the schools were being bought down by the legislature, so they amped up their increases. And so at the time when the state was buying down property taxes for school districts, the counties and the cities made a major move up. And you can see the percentage changes as we go through. About the only thing that stops this curve is major recessionary environments, which we're about ready to head into. I've got 30,000 layoffs in my senatorial district right now. The price of oil was $32 today. I expect it to go lower. And the stock market went down over 300 points because we've got an economic cycle called a business cycle. See, the problem with government is it blows past business cycles. In the city of Houston's example, when this was going on, they were continuing to hire and still hired a tremendous number of people in 2009, knowing that we were in a recession. They were still building employment. And that's one of the reasons why they're going to be out of cash by April or May. They've got a substantial crisis in the city because they've overhired for a long period of time. Now, next slide. Now, as high as the cities were, the counties are closer to 100% increase over 11 years. This is exact amount of money that's come into all 254 counties in 11 years. 96.88% more. Now, there's no new counties being created. There are new special districts being created. There's not many new cities being created. But this is the example of how much local government has grown. Now, why is that important? How much has your paycheck gone up? Okay. Dennis Paul, state rep in my area, you know. Nowhere 100% of this one. In fact, the average, using census data for the statewide median household income in 2013, the last year available, so this is just a 10-year increase, not 11-year, okay, was a 6.6% increase in 10 years in median household income in the state from $49,000 and change to $53,000. That's all personal income's gone up in the state, 6.6%. Now we'll back down the last change and make that, probably 89%. But that means that for all county taxes, wherever you are in the state, your personal income went up 6.6%, and your actual income went up about 89%, or maybe 85%. That means that your tax bill went up 13 times faster than your personal income. It's unsustainable. It's bad public policy. We're growing too much. Give me another amen. Okay, thank you.
Preach it, brother.
Right. We're preaching to a good audience here. Now, okay, let's also talk statewide, all property tax revenues. Let's go to, I think, right, go back. Yeah, right, stop right there. Okay, stop, summary. Okay, right, okay. When you look at it, property values are up 92%, from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. It's a great thing to have a growing economy, okay? But the taxpayer's ability to pay has to come into the equation, okay? You've got total tax load up 69% over this time. School taxes are up, 55. County taxes 98, and that's with a great buy down of taxes. Let's go back to that slide on the school tax increase. I want to show you that specifically. One more. There we go. Okay, the legislature votes in 2006 to buy down tax rates for everybody in the state. For the only year, besides the recession year that you'll see on this, there was nearly a 10% decrease in school levy at that point because the state was finally making up what we've already taken from you in Robin Hood, and they dropped it down almost 10%. So the problem is that unless you control the growth of government, no amount of money is enough, okay? The real problem is that we're letting government grow too fast because Thank you, Robin. Okay. But because we just don't have, we don't have all the money in the world to throw at it. And both Senator Estes and Representative Turner are right that part of this money does go in the property tax relief fund. So as you cut the franchise tax, you have to have the revenue to cut it. Because if you cut it and revenue doesn't show up, okay, then your property tax rates go back up. Now, it doesn't take a genius to realize that, fortunately, we passed a very conservative budget. And we appreciate TPPF's acknowledgement of that, because that's 1.8% growth over 2 years, 3.6 not compounded. It's a great growth of government. We're way below inflation and population at 1.8% a year. But that means that at the state level, we've got a good responsible growth curve, okay? But we don't have it in local government at this point in time. And the school tax levies are tied in dramatically to what happens with school funding and, of course, the state budget. So, for example, okay, we also have an enormous number of taxing jurisdictions in the state. We're up to 4,129 taxing jurisdictions, of which 10% of them are in Harris County alone that can levy an ad valorem tax. You've only got 5 school districts that were closed, 2 new cities were incorporated, and of course you've seen a growth of special districts because we do have people moving from rural to suburban to urban areas on special districts. So when you have taxes growing more than 10 times faster than personal income, we all have to stop and say, stop, okay? Because this isn't just a Houston problem. Years ago, I was on a bus trip, what seems to be another lifetime, okay, to come up and testify about tax growth, and it was dismissed at the time that it was a Harris County problem, okay? But in this last year alone, Harris County had their average home value go up 15%. Travis County was 12%. San Antonio was 11%. Dallas was 9%. It's everywhere in the state. You can't get to these numbers without not having tremendous growth in tax revenue everywhere, because these are tremendous increases, okay? So, what are we going to do about it, okay? Well, the Lieutenant Governor has put me on a mission to go travel the state with Senator Taylor and 5 other draftees, okay? We're starting in San Antonio on the 27th, and we're going to go around and we're going to listen about solutions to this problem. Now, Representative Bonham was here, and obviously he has a lot to do with the House Ways and Means Committee. He likes the idea of rolling back tax rates, because our problem is as values go up, the rates always stay high. Because people always tell you what? I'm not raising your taxes, okay? But what they're really doing is they're not raising their tax rate, but your values are going up. And I will tell you that when you look at personal income growth, that's a problem. But if you look at corporate taxation on property taxes, in our urban areas, we've had multiple years of 20% increases on average or higher. Now, there's an old saying, it's called the Rule of 72. You take anything and you increase it by 10% a year for 7 years, what happens? It doubles, okay? Well, we didn't quite hit that curve, okay, on taxation. But anywhere near that curve is bad news, because we need to slow the rate of growth of government. Now, also, too, one of the things we need to do is get into a system where the public's involved. Right now, there's notices that go out in every newspaper, and even to the trained people in government, those notices are gobbledygook, because they no longer have a reference to how much did my bill go up from last year. That was a change that was made in the past session that we didn't catch this session. So we're going to go back and make it real clear that taxation goes up a certain amount. We're going to have a published history of that, because we want everybody to know, and above a certain rate, we expect the folks to get involved in a rollback election, because we need to get this on the course of the taxpayer's ability to pay gets back into the session. I was one of the happiest votes I can be to be part of giving back $4.05 billion worth of money. We gave back $250 million in occupation taxes. We gave back over $2.5 billion in part due to the efforts of Senator Estes and Senator Taylor and many others, and on both sides of the aisle and both sides of the House and the Senate. And we gave back, the public voted themselves $1.2 billion in homestead exemption relief. But we have to address this curve. This is our fundamental problem, and we're going to be listening around the state. So I'm coming to a town near you. If you want to show up here, okay, then I'm going to call you out of the crowd to show up and testify wherever we go. Because we want a solution that is good long-term, and I can think of nothing better to spend a year visiting Texans and talk about how much they can afford on their tax bills, because that's what we need to do in government. So when I show up to a city near you, say yes and show up, because I'll expect you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Senator Bettencourt. At this time, I'd like to take some questions from the audience. I think we've heard a lot of good information. Hopefully you've got some good questions along the way. We've got one right up here. Please wait for the microphone. There we go.
I think you need to put 2 more columns on your chart and break out the operational cost and the social program cost.
All right.
My chart or yours, or Scott's? Okay, no, that's right.
Would that be for the cities and counties? For the
Especially school
districts? Yeah, school districts.
School and city. I mean, we all know that there's functions that the city or any government needs to do to function. But there's also a lot of, I feel, social programs and such that aren't really utilized or overtaken, abused.
Sure.
You know, if I could answer that, I think we need zero-based budgeting in all of our state agencies. Okay? I think we need zero-based budgeting in all of our majors. We actually had a bill that I filed on 24 of the major small, if I say smaller, school districts and cities. By the way, when you look at small, Dallas Independent School District, Houston Independent School, the City of Houston, these are huge operations nationally. We need zero-based budgeting there. And it's because it's about priorities. We need to come up with an acceptable yardstick to measure government growth. And if people need to go above that yardstick, they can go make their case to the public. I think it's important that we do that at the state as well as at local government levels. Now, to your direct point, we can break it down into maintenance and operations and interest and sinking fund, because a lot of people think that debt's free. The reason why they think that is because they've been given television commercials. In my own county, I had hundreds of ads, thousands of ads ran that said if you vote for these bonds, you're voting for a no tax increase bond. I want to say that again. I had nearly $1 billion. It was being sold as a no tax increase, not a no tax rate increase, just no tax increase at all, because they're counting on the curve to pay it off. But we have to tell the public the truth. There's no fact or supposition fact that I know of that there's a no tax increase bond anywhere ever. Ever. Okay? We need to tell the public the truth. Good question. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else from the panelists? What other questions? Right back here. Yes.
Just real quick, what are the numbers we're looking at when we're talking about finding something to eliminate the margins tax that would have to be made up elsewhere or cut from spending or found in other savings? What is the scope that we're looking at to do that?
I know.
I couldn't understand what
Yeah,
you're
you're,
How big is the budget item for?
Representative Turner, right? It's about 6.5–7 billion.
6.5.
Yeah, right, right. And
After the
after
cut,
the current cut right now.
yeah, it's 6. So it was $9 billion. It's now be 6.5.
And I hope everybody out there that was paying the franchise tax enjoys the leadership that Senator Estes showed, because this is a tax cut we need now because we're in a recession. Whether anybody out there politically correct wants to say it, well, I've seen enough. We're in a recession, and that's when we need to be cutting taxes for businesses. Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions? Right here.
I have a simple question to start for Mr. Drenkard. I saw your pyramid, gross margin. Would you explain to me the difference between that gross margin and a value-added tax?
So a value-added tax would be economically equivalent to a sales tax, but just administratively different. So in a retail sales tax, the entire levy is levied once at the final point of sale. And then in a value-added tax, that same levy is broken up and levied throughout the production chain, but it's not able to pyramid on top of itself because you get to deduct the value added.
I don't think.
Or you get to deduct the previous value, and you only pay the tax on the value that you add. Excuse me.
I've seen value-added taxes that don't do that. They just keep increasing.
So by definition, they don't pyramid. There are many places where you can have things that don't conform to my idea of a well-structured value-added tax. But in the pure sense, they are economically equivalent to a sales tax, but administratively different. The margin tax, of course, is the worst of the three because it collects the same amount of revenue, but does it in that pyramiding fashion where taxes stack on top of taxes, and it's completely untransparent, and then the burden sort of grows as the items move through the production chain.
It's okay, it's just in between bad and worse.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Question right here.
Yes, this is probably in the domain of my illustrious senator. Paul, you remember when I bought my house, it was like taxes were $7,000. They had 3 taxing jurisdictions. Now, I think I counted on the last tax, it's going to be 8 different taxing jurisdictions, 10? 9 taxing jurisdictions.
Right.
So it's not only all the taxing jurisdictions are increasing, I'm paying 600% of what I paid and I hadn't moved, but where are all these other taxing jurisdictions being created? What's authorizing them to all of a sudden come after and take my house?
You know, by the way, that's Malcolm Morris. Okay. Malcolm, when you have that, they're either created by the legislature or there's also tax increment reinvestment zones that are created by home rule cities. So you're right, you now have 9, 10 in an urban area. I've seen tax bills with 12 lines on them. Right.
Passing the buck.
Well,
I mean, somebody's moving it, so I'm not showing my tax increment, just create a new tax jurisdiction. That's how I didn't rate that.
it's why those growth numbers are off the chart. Okay. By the way, I was remiss. I didn't see Senator Huffines over in the corner. He was hiding behind you, Malcolm. But he also was a big proponent for eliminating the entire margin stats. Trust me, I know we talked about it for a long time. But anyway, I should give him a hand for that.
If I could quickly add, because I think it's a great question, and this from the comptroller's office, just some numbers to share with y'all. The number of special purpose districts that levy property taxes has increased 45%, more than 45% since 1992, and so the most, and created by the legislature. Well, it's your legislature creating special purpose districts, and usually, and generally speaking, I'll share, the way typically these bills pass is these are local bills, usually, that are passed by the local representative or senator who represents that area. There's some exceptions to that, but generally most of these are passed because someone locally has brought them to them. But some are justified, some are not. So, but just to share with you what they are very briefly, 600 plus are municipal utility districts, nearly 300 emergency services districts, 129 hospital districts, 109 water control districts, 64 water districts, and 64 college districts. So those are some of the new districts.
Malcolm, the answer to your question is yes, it's taxation without representation because you don't elect those folks and all those boards anymore. That's the problem. Even in tax increment reinvestment zones, the city council members don't have any control over their expenditures anymore. It's part of the problem that we've got. Well, we can certainly try. Now, one thing we did, and I was a failure to admit this, mention this, Representative Creighton had a great bill, 1760, that we passed by amendment, and that this year for the first time, because of Senator Estes and Senator Taylor and Senator Huffman's vote, we increased the fact that to raise your property tax rate above last year's effective rate, you have to get a 60% supermajority vote of the body that's doing that vote. because we wanted to send a signal, and it passed with bipartisan support, because we want to send a signal that if you are trying to raise taxes, you got to have a supermajority vote to do it. We have to get out of this constant loop that, hey, I'm not responsible, it's the mean old appraisal district, or I'm not raising your rate, so therefore I'm not the problem. The problem at the end of the day is if you take the money, you need to own up to how much you've collected. And that was a great bill that passed this time with a great amendment, if I could say so myself, because we're trying to get at that, right.
Question right up here. Front.
Great discussion here today. And I know we've talked a lot about transparency, and I so appreciate that. It is so important, as was Creighton's bill. But a lot of us want to see the rollback rate modified or changed, lowered, and eliminating the petition gathering. I know a lot of local governments say that would cut off their lifeline. But the truth is, it would just give taxpayers an opportunity to determine just how much local government they want and are willing to pay for. Why can't we seem to move that forward?
Well, as a freshman that would leap before he looked, I filed that bill at 4%, okay? Now, a whole bunch of people that got this money showed up and said, don't do it, okay? Then what happened is the appraisal notices went out again. Everybody's values went up. And when we look at these numbers, the reasons why this revenue increase is so high, because I had taxing jurisdictions calculate to 9 10,000ths of a point below the rollback rate, because they were hovering at that close level. Now, I think the mood has changed. I think that there's a lot of interest in this. House Ways and Means Chairman and I like this concept. We're going to talk about it a great deal. Also, too, we need to get out of the idea of inviting people to meetings that nobody will show up at, which is what some of these meetings are. We should let the taxing jurisdictions do their business, but if they want to go above a certain amount, then they have to do their public hearings and go it. And we should not have petition requirements. It would take 200,000 voters signing a petition in Harris County to do a rollback in less than 90 days. I see some of my Tea Party people out there. They're even not that good collecting those number of petitions. It's preposterous. It's never going to happen. So we need to have good yardsticks, good growth of government analysis, and quite frankly, if people make the case, if taxing jurisdiction makes the case, look how many school bond issues pass, okay? If you make a good case, people will listen to you. If you don't make a good case, they won't. And we need to get back to that style of representative government.
Let me, since things are winding up here, in deference to my colleague Representative Turner, I may shock all of you by saying this, but actually the Democrats have the simplest tax plan of all. It's a very short form. It asks you, how much did you make, and then says, send it in. Hello.
We have one more question right back here.
He only had one put down in the whole panel, so he's okay. He can survive it.
No. One more question right here.
Senator Bettencourt, we've probably got over 2,000 employees in your district from the company that I work for, and we would welcome any drive into our campus to talk about this issue. But in that regard, I guess what I would like to understand from the legislators at the dais, in the next session, how would you see the bill, what would the bill look like that would address these things? I mean, can you simplify what we would be looking at that could address these things for the audience?
Well, with all of this, we practice what we preach in the Texas Senate. We passed a bill about controlling the growth of the state budget to inflation and population. That's probably the type of bill that you'll see. There's other options. It's called a rollback bill, where you roll down the rollback rate. Right now it's at 8% plus new construction, new homestead exemptions. The real number is 13% a year. There's no reason to let government grow at 13% a year, okay? And I like the inflation and population, because if we have a fast-growing county or fast-growing area, it gets them a higher growth curve. They need it. If we have a less robust area, they have a lower number. There's a lot of ways to do this, and that's why we're going to be going around asking for people's input, because we're going to find what we think is the best solution. And so you're welcome. Your 2,000 employees are welcome at the meetings we're going to have in Montgomery County and Harris County.
So I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask the last question. Next session looks like we're probably going to have less revenue coming in. I mean, as you said earlier, Senator Bettencourt, we're slowing down quite a bit. Oil's hitting $32 a barrel today. That's way below the comptroller's projections. We're not based on oil like we once were. In the 1980s, we're about 20% of the private economy was based on oil and gas. Now it's around 14%. The workforce is about 2.6% employed by oil and gas sector, so it's not as large. We're a much more diverse state than we once were. But that doesn't mean it's not going to affect other areas indirectly, maybe not directly. So as that slows down state's revenue, and the comptroller noted yesterday sales tax revenue was down 1.1% year over year. How can we get some of these things done? That was a major issue this past session with eliminating the margin tax entirely. You know, so as we get into the next session, how are we going to overcome some of those obstacles?
Can I have my senior partner hold up a prop?
Please.
Well, just on a personal side, I'm an incessant doodler. It kind of helps me process things, so I've been doodling up here.
That's what you have to do.
Cut. It says cut.
Let me just elaborate on that. When I first got in, there was a senator had been here a long, long time, and he said, you know, I find it easier to work when we're in economic crisis than when we are flush with money. I said, why is that? He said, you just tell everybody no. And there's a lot of truth to that. And you got to realize that we came into a session, we were staring at a $28 billion deficit, and I was just going, how are we going to survive? We not only survived, we cut state government. We thrived. So let me tell you, it's hard to cut stuff because there's some stuff that you know you're cutting, and it's not fat, it's muscle on the bone. But there's still plenty of fat in state government. Now, compared to the federal government, we look like a lean, mean, racing greyhound, you know, as far as, but still, we have stared down bad times in the past, and we have the ability, the type of men and women that are being elected to the Texas legislature today have the guts to make the cuts that need to be made to keep Texas prosperous.
Okay, you know, yeah, here are the mathematics of this. For every $5 we're below the comptroller's estimate on oil, we cost ourselves in the budget about $200 million in severance taxes, not counting the loss and sales tax, which is going to be significant. One of the reasons why we're down 1.1 in the state is that Houston's down 6, 7, 8%. It's going to go double digit because Houston's going to drag down the state on the sales tax collections. We left with several billion in the checking account. That probably is gone by the time we get back, because this is not just a V this time. This is who survived the 1980s, the rest of us. I know Morrissey did, okay, right, the Lennons did. This is going to be a U. We're going to be in for a while at a low number. And importantly, what Craig talked about, just simply cut, is this. I work for a body for $600 a month. I get the privilege of going in with people that do public policy. And we still work on budgets. The budget work groups are bipartisan, right, Chris? Okay, right. They are, and in the Senate, we're broken up on the Finance Committee to where as a freshman, I got put on 4 or 5 work groups for half the budget, then IT projects everywhere, and I don't think I saw the light of day, my staff will correct me, for 6 weeks. Because we're in there making decisions about whether an agency should have 1.5 FTEs or a half an FTE at that granularity level. Now, we still have a lot to do, but part of this is that you have to be willing to work on it, because we can't pass a budget. It passed the Senate version passed 30-1. The House version passed almost equally that way, even though I think the final compromise had a few people bleed off on, in both chambers. But it takes that level of dedication, because we're not going to plan on growing the budget by more than we did this last session. We're going to stay with inflation and population. And, and I look at it, the staff members, the finance committee people, everyone else, we spent a lot of time doing it. And I can't speak for Chairman Nelson, but I think I can say that I cannot imagine her not coming in with the same good budget that she did last time, because it was a strong budget and a good leadership, and that's what I think we're all hoping to vote for in this next session.
Representative Turner, do you have something? All right.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just add my different perspective. I think that, first let me just say, in terms of what happens next session, my party is in the minority. Republicans control the state, and Republican leaders will determine what kind of budget we have. That's the bottom line. We'll have some input around the edges, but the Republican leadership will decide what kind of budget it is. My opinion is, at a time when our school finance system is in court, where our hospitals are grappling with rising costs and reduced revenue, when we have a growing population that we're still not keeping up on transportation funding, even with the injection of funding last year, and numerous other needs. And since we just cut $4 billion in taxes less than a year ago, that 2017 is not the time to put new tax cuts on the table. But, I'll just close with this. When I was a Boy Scout, as a young man growing up in Dallas, working on to become an Eagle Scout, I was working on my, Senator Taylor probably remembers this, he's an Eagle Scout as well, my citizenship in the Nation merit badge. And the scout leader who was teaching the class said, I want to tell you a story. He said, years ago, this man, this emperor came to this man, his scholar and the most smartest person in the kingdom. He said, I want you to take all the knowledge in the world, and I want you to boil it down to enough books that will fit just in this one room, in this one library. I want to have all the knowledge in the world in this one room. And so the man worked on it for years and years, and finally one day he said, I've got all the knowledge in the world in this one room. He said, well, that's really good. He said, now can you take what's in this room and condense it all down into one book? And he said, okay, I'll try. And so years won't go by, and later he comes back, I've got one book, it's all the knowledge in the world. He said, okay, that's good. He said, now I want you to take this book and condense it down into one sheet of paper. One sheet of paper. I want to have all the knowledge in the world. And I said, okay. And so years later, he comes back and says, here's your piece of paper. And the man read it, and he said, that's right. And the piece of paper said is that there is no free lunch. And that...
I was wondering what merit badge you were going to get to.
Yeah, citizenship in the nation. So, and that's essentially it. I don't like paying taxes. I know my constituents don't like paying taxes, but schools aren't free, roads aren't free, and at some point, we've got to recognize that all of these things do cost some money. So, how do we figure out a system that is fairer, and simpler than what we have now, and a system that works for all Texans, not just some? Thank you.
Thank you. I have one last word from Scott, and then we got to...
There is one concrete policy suggestion that you could consider implementing in a year where revenues are down. The goal here is that you don't want to waste a legislative session just because you're in an economic recession. And one of the things that has worked in other states is implementing a revenue trigger. And you can enact a revenue trigger anytime. The way it would work is you say if revenues grow above a certain percentage or above inflation plus population or whatever the metric is that you decide to make the trigger kick in at, you could have a guaranteed cut in the state's margin tax rate. And this has worked really effectively in West Virginia, Indiana, Massachusetts, in fact, as well. Other states that have tried to phase down, or in this case, with the margin tax, you could phase out the tax. And that's something that you can do today that will pay off down the road, get you on the train toward tax reform, even in a year where revenues are scarce.
Well, unfortunately, we've got to wrap this up. There are some pieces of literature at your tables of some of the research we've done at the foundation of reasons why we need to eliminate the margin tax. And our ultimate goal long term is actually to eliminate property taxes, where you can actually have the freedom to own your property. So please thank my panelists today. It's been a